We're continuing in Hebrews 11, and I'm just going to give some background to how we got here. You remember Hebrews 11 is a chapter about faith and how people of the Old Testament demonstrated this faith, which is to trust in God. And so far we went through this, and we saw Abel, and we saw Enoch, and then we saw Noah, and then got to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and we went through them, and it spoke about all these people living by faith, not having received promises and dying with their faith. We then made our way down to Moses, Jacob, Joseph, and Moses, where we did last week. Remember the parting of the sea and how it was Moses' faith that allowed them to go through the sea and to celebrate the Passover. Okay, so we got down to that, and then we also saw the faith of Joshua and how the walls of Jericho fell, and then Rahab, who was the prostitute there. So where we left off was looking at this verse here. So, Badwell, could you read Hebrews 11, 32 to the end of the chapter, please? Thank you. So wouldn't it be wonderful if somebody could put on your headstone, "The world was not worthy of this person"? I mean, it's a beautiful thing to have said about you. These people were considered to be too good for this world. And because they were too good for this world, they were outcasts of the world. Okay, so I just wanted to start. Now, there's a series of names there, and this isn't in sequence, but last week we spoke a little bit about Jephthah, who's one of the names there in the beginning of that list that Badwell read. He says, "I do not have time to talk about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel." So I just wanted to say a few things about Jephthah because I think it helps us to look at a map to see what was going on there. So you see there, the river that goes down the centre of the map? That's the Jordan. Okay, so when the conquest happened, they crossed over into the Jordan, and that's when they took Jericho, etc. Right? So they were in the wilderness area. Reuben, who was the natural firstborn, he said, "I would actually prefer to stay on the other side of the river." So he was given a portion of land. See that yellow bit at the bottom? That's Reuben. And above him is Gad. And above that is Manasseh, which is on both sides. So sometimes you hear the expression, the half tribe of Manasseh. That's because half is on one side of the Jordan and half is on the other side of the Jordan. Okay, so the problem they had with Jephthah was the Ammonites. See the Ammonites there on the far right? Now, the Ammonites and the Moabites were the descendants of the sons of Lot. Remember his two daughters? He slept with his two daughters, and these were their sons. And the Ammonites had encroached right up to the Jordan and then began to make their way into Ephraim. You can see Ephraim there, the purple. And so they were causing havoc. They'd not only taken over the lands of the ones on the east side of the Jordan, but they were now encroaching on the people on the other side. So when this was happening, there was a call for this is in Gilead. So, this area also is called Gilead, right? So there was a call that went out in Gilead to anybody who could step up and lead a campaign against the Ammonites. And nobody did. Nobody would step up in the whole thing. So then they went and looked for this man called Jephthah, who was outcast by his brothers because his mother was a prostitute. They said, "You're not going to share in the inheritance with us." So they cast him out. And he went to a place that nobody knows where it is, but it's called the land of Tob. And there in the land of Tob, he acted as an adventurer. And the actual Hebrew for this designation was that these were empty men. These were men of no values. So we get a translation of adventurer, or they were bandits, basically. It was a mob of bandits. And they were just used to taking whatever they wanted in this land of Tob. So anyway, they went and found Jephthah, and they said, nobody wants to step up. Do you want to step up? And if you step up, we'll make you our ruler. And he wasn't sure about this. So anyway, that's how it came about. And then he came and he took on the Ammonites. First he had a long discussion with the Ammonites about, it's a lengthy passage about the land dispute. Because you took our land, no, but our God gave us this land. Wouldn't you take from your God Shemesh what he gives you? And, so there's, anyway, the negotiations broke down. And then Jephthah went into battle against these people, and he took the whole of the region back, and even went into Ephraim and secured that. After this, he went back home, and the Ephraimites crossed over and said, "What's this about you taking these people on and taking all the glory?" So they never responded to the call. And the interesting thing about Ephraim is that this is the second time they did that. When Gideon won his battle, they also wanted to take on Gideon and destroy his community, saying, "Why did you want to take all the glory? Why didn't you call us to share in the victory?" But he did. He put out calls to everybody and nobody came. And Gideon was very diplomatic. He said something like, "I'm not a heel compared to the glory of Ephraim." Of course Ephraim would have won. He completely crawled and grovelled to them so that Ephraim had their ego rubbed and they were okay with it. So anyway, that's what Ephraim did. And then, so after Jephthah wins this battle, they come to him and he's exhausted. He's just had this enormous battle with just his ragtag mob and attain this victory. And they do this stunt again. "Why did you do this?" And Jephthah was not so diplomatic as Gideon. He wasn't going to just praise them up. So he said, "Okay, you want to fight?" So they came to fight him, and he just went head to head with them. He didn't sort of try to negotiate his way out of it. And that's when the Ephraimites pursued him into the east side of the Jordan, and then he defeated them there, and as they were coming back to cross the Jordan, he killed all the Ephraimites who tried to cross it. Remember that? So that's the background to that story. And of course, the critical thing was that he asked the Lord to give him victory, and he said that he would give his first thing that came out of his house to the Lord as a burnt offering. As a burnt offering. And of course his daughter came out, and then that's really the notable thing about it. But anyway, that's just some of the background. But I think some people had questions about that story last week. Does that answer some of those? Do you remember? Nobody can remember. Okay, so this is how the passage goes. We don't have time to talk about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. Catherine, are you awake enough to find 1 Samuel 12:11? Oh, sorry. Or Paul? Whoever. Yeah, 1 Samuel 12:11. And is there a footnote to that? Any other footnote? Okay. In some, has anybody got a footnote to that verse? What have you got, Justin? Yeah. So remember, the Hebrews writer is using the Septuagint, right? He's using the Greek Old Testament. So in his version, Samson is also there. So this is interesting because he uses this list: Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel. And take David out of there, and it's basically that list that Samuel referred to back there. So he's not just pulling this out of the air, he's actually referring back to something Samuel had spoken about, how Israel had been delivered by these guys. So, just a point of interest. Okay, so let's look at Gideon first. Okay, so Gideon was told that Yahweh was with him. In fact, Yahweh appeared to him, the angel of the Lord. And when he realized that he was the angel of the Lord, he feared that he would die as well. So in two instances amongst these people, they meet with what they call the angel of the Lord. Okay, and Gideon is one of them. Katie, can you read Judges 6:11 to 17, please? Out loud. Big loud voice. Huh? Judges 6:11 to 17. (17) Is it? So what happened when he did the offering? Okay, you can stop there. So he encountered the angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord, to encounter the angel of the Lord is the same as encountering God. He believed he was going to die, but God was going to protect him. Okay, so you've got this kind of, it starts off with some banter almost. In the same way Joshua, remember how Joshua came across the angel of the Lord, the man with the sword drawn? And he spoke to him at first, and then the dawning came, this is the angel of the Lord. And then he had to get down and worship. So this is Gideon. So in other words, Gideon had contact in this instance with Christ. It was Christ who was sending him. It was Christ who was going to win the victory. Right? This is the angel of the Lord acting in this thing. So the Gideon, you know how he went on to get the victory. He didn't even have to raise an army. He only had 300 men with torches and fire pots, and they basically terrorised. Who were they fighting? I can't even remember. Who? No, not Jericho. The Midianites. Yeah, Midianites. That was, remember Moses' wife, her father was the priest of Midian. So there's a connection there. So anyway, he gained this huge victory without hardly any loss of life. And he was the smallest of the weakest tribe of Manasseh. So, but then he fell into a terrible apostasy there in Judges 8:22-27. Paul, can you read that? Judges 8:22-27. Yeah, so I mean, it's not a very satisfactory end for Gideon. He made this. It appears that he kind of made a monument out of a priestly garment. He made an ephod out of gold. There's nothing in the law that says anything like this, and I think he's establishing it in his hometown as almost a monument to himself, and this became a snare. But the interesting thing is, at the beginning of that passage, he was asked to become ruler, and he said, no, the Lord will rule over you. So he was very much in believing Yahweh needed to be the boss, okay? So then we come to Barak. Not Barack Obama. Okay, so Barak is actually from Naphtali. And what makes him interesting is that he was not a judge. Do you remember who the judge was during Deborah? Okay, so the one judge in Judges who was a female was Deborah. So Deborah went and got Barak to come and fight. And who was it that, you have to help me because there's so many of these little groups. Who was it Barak fought against? Just Canaanites. Yeah, so anyway, the interesting thing is that Deborah is the only judge that comes from Ephraim. Right? Now, I want you to think about this a little bit. Okay? Ephraim is the number one tribe. Okay? And they're surly. I told you about 2 times when they were upset that they didn't get the prestige they felt like they deserved. even though they didn't step up. But they did have one judge, one ruler, and it was Deborah, a woman. What do you think that might have told Jews historically about Ephraim? Sorry? Yeah, but what is it? I mean, try not to think like a 21st century person. Yeah. What is the implications if you produce one judge and that judge is a woman in that world? It wasn't. Yeah, it's a critique of the men that that Ephraim could not produce a male judge, and it produced a female judge. And then when that woman wanted to go to war with the Canaanites, right? Where did she go to find a general? Did she get a general from Ephraim? No, she went to Naphtali to get Barak. See, that's again a slight. So every time, it's like Ephraim never steps up. Every battle, they're not to be found, but then they want the glory at the end of it. When they actually have their own judge, no man steps up to lead the army. They have to find a judge, a Barak from another location to come and defend them. You might think, well, why is this interesting? It's interesting because Judges is a book about the future king. And Ephraim looks like it's in the box seat for producing the king of Israel. But all the way through Judges, you get this refrain. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes because there was no king. So it's preparing the way for Samuel, who's the last judge, who appoints kings. So by showing Ephraim in this light, it's showing that no leader will come from Ephraim. No ruler will come from Ephraim. They can't produce a judge, they can't produce a ruler. You see? And then, just to show you, this is sort of extra stuff, and I hope it's not too uninteresting, but in Judges, you also have a portrait. And at the very end, you know there's that portrait of there's a man who is a Levite from Bethlehem. Okay? And he is travelling through a town called Gibeah in Benjamin. And when he's there, these men take his concubine and assault her through the night. Do you remember that horrible, horrible, horrible story? Anyway, in the morning, he steps out of his house and she's practically dead on the doorstep and then dies. And then he cuts her into 12 pieces and sends her throughout the nation. Right? Do you remember that hideous story? Now, you might think, it's such a grotesque thing. But there's some strong symbolism in it. Because Gibeah, where this took place, is the hometown of Saul. And Bethlehem is the hometown of David. You see, so Bethlehem is the sinned against. Gibeah is the perpetrator. So when you're looking at a future of what the kings will look like, Saul becomes the first one from Gibeah, and he's a disgrace. And then David. Do you see how it plays into the big picture narrative? See, these little cues that you probably wouldn't notice, but they're so important to people paying attention because people would be appalled, totally appalled with what happened, and rightly so, what happened in Gibeah. So how could Gibeah produce a king? It's disgraceful, you see. But anyway, these are just side notes. But anyway, we're talking about Barak. He's from Naphtali. Not Naphtali. Maybe that's where it comes from, is it? Is that where... Does Naphtali have any connection with Naphtali? Oh, okay. It's probably Nathan, is it? Yeah, it's Nathan. That's Jewish. Okay, so the Lord went ahead of him and commanded him to slaughter Sisera. So again, it says Yahweh blessed him. And what's routine with these judges is the Spirit of the Lord falls upon them in preparation for the battle, and they gain their victory. So that's Barak. And then we have Samson. And the reason why I'm mentioning where they're from is because this is important in the scheme of Israel. You know, if you think of yourself as a, like you might be a fan of the Torino soccer club, right? And if you're looking through the history of soccer, you're always looking for where your team won, okay? This is the same. If you're from a tribe, you want to know the success stories from your tribe. So these identities are very important for the tribe. So Dan produced Samson. And Samson, we all know what Samson's like.
Remember the prophecy.
It's like this.
Samson, chosen by the living God to be his hand of vengeance. It's his will, but it is not mine.
Who is this God who gives you such strength?
3 vows were bestowed upon me. No wine, no touching the dead, no cutting of my hair.
There are whispers of a Hebrew with great strength. It is a story for slaves, nothing more.
I want you to investigate this.
No, please.
You find me the secret of his power.
My Delilah. Well, if you wanted to fight, you should have brought more men. I want him dead.
He has the strength of a god. I saw it with my own eyes.
He is not a god!
Samson, the Philistines are upon you.
My strength is now your strength. What would you have me do? My name is Samson.
So that about
You will
sums it
face
up.
the wrath of God.
Did anybody see that movie? It came out, you saw it. Where did you see it? I'd never heard of it. It's about 4 or 5 years, 10 years ago or something. It was old. Now, one of the things, Samson is always depicted as having lots of muscles, right? But he didn't have lots of muscles because nobody said to him, he gets all his strength from his muscles. So he just looked like an ordinary person. The question was, where does he get his strength? It comes from Yahweh. But anyway, Samson is the sort of person that nobody would ever want their children to be like. But nonetheless, the Hebrews writer puts him in here as a role model for faith. And what he did was he destroyed the Philistines. He acted as a judge. He was filled with the Spirit of God when he did these things. And you know his final act when he was inside the Philistine temple, and he went between the pillars and he pushed it over, and it collapsed on him, and destroyed some 3,000 of the chief officials and dignitaries of the Philistines. Basically decimated the whole community in doing that. That was the fulfillment of the prophecies that God said that he would free the Israelites from the Philistines. And he did it. But he didn't do it the way you would expect somebody to do it. I mean, we would expect somebody who was prayerful or this or that or noble. No, I mean, in other words, God achieved his end completely, but not in a single way that we would anticipate, you know. But the interesting thing about, but I've read the Samson story very carefully a number of times. I'm looking for some redeeming quality. And really isn't much going on, other than he asked his parents to arrange his marriage. That's the only thing that is worthwhile in his outlook. It's not something that's very common, but he was good there. But when he called upon God, when he pushed over the things, he actually used the three names of God in the one sentence. It doesn't come through very much, but he actually, he was blind, but it says he turned his eyes to Elohim, Yahweh, Adonai. The three names of God in the one invocation. So again, he did have faith in the living God, identifying that God by name and calling upon him to bring judgment upon the people. Okay, Jephthah, we've already covered. He's an outcast of Manasseh. Again, Manasseh actually produced quite a number of judges, surprisingly. He took the rash vow, but he kept it. I think this was only possible. Nobody would keep the vow that he took, except that he understood that there was a better resurrection and he had this fear of Yahweh. So in 1135, it says, women received back their dead, raised to life again. Others were tortured and refused to be released so that they might gain a better resurrection. You see, so this is the summation of all of them. They were prepared to die in order to gain a better resurrection. He was prepared to sacrifice his daughter because he knew he was looking for a better resurrection. Okay, so belief in Jesus and the ultimate outcome of the resurrection are almost synonymous throughout this passage. So David, we know heaps about David. David, of course, knew Jesus quite well. He described him intimately. He described his death event in Psalm 22. He spoke about his resurrection. He spoke about him being his son and his Lord in Psalm 110. So there's extensive writings. David's writings, in fact, the New Testament's messianic view, that is, view of Christ as the one who came, is really built upon heavily David's writings. David is the one quoted most and overwhelmingly as to who Jesus is and the role he would fill. David actually, I think there's about 68 references that he makes directly to the Messiah that were fulfilled in prophecy. So then, the last in this block is Samuel and the prophets. So just a word about Samuel first. Samuel, I said before that Ephraim didn't produce a judge, but Samuel was actually an Ephraimite. But he was adopted into the Levitical household as a child. So at that point, remember he was taken in by the house of Eli? And so at that point, he was functioning as a priest. And so we talk about Samuel and the prophets. So this is just a word of from Peter's sermon. Indeed, all the prophets from Samuel on, as many as have spoken, have foretold of these days. So remember, the theme that we're looking at is, did these people know Jesus? Did these people see forward in history to Jesus? Well, even Peter says, from Samuel and all the prophets that followed, and that includes all of them really, you have this idea that they were talking about the days of Jesus. They were looking forward to the reign of King Jesus. So, any question about any of those? I'm scooting through pretty quick because I want to finish this chapter tonight. So they're all straightforward. Remember too that there's a couple of points to be made. One is Aaron is not mentioned, or the high priests, yet he incorporates the judges. Also, the period where he draws most of the people in this list had no effective mediation. So a lot of them are before the law is given. And then you have the judges period. There's no priesthood in operation during the judges period, or pretty much no priesthood. And so the fact that he's calling upon all these people who are saved shows not only that Aaron's not in the list, but the people who are saved didn't need the Aaronic priest. It's double. So he concludes. Didn't have time to talk about these people. So who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness was made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, and of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, in dens and caves in the earth. All of these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise, God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. Okay, so the points being made there are, these people endured a great deal because of their belief in Jesus and their hope in a better resurrection. Do you see how this resurrection theme kind of comes through constantly? Like even when it talks about Abraham, it says, and the patriarchs, that they were looking for another city whose chief architect and builder is God. If they were thinking about a city on earth, they would have had opportunity to return, but they didn't. They wanted something in the next. So their eyes are completely locked into a future existence, which is far superior. And that's what faith does. Faith enables us to see a better future and to live for it. That's what these people are doing, right? They saw the future, and so because they saw the future, they did not despise the present. They were prepared to go through sufferings, tortures, being sawn in two. Their bodies were put to the flames. It didn't matter because there was something far better to come in the future. They achieved much, they endured much because of their faith. Something that's said twice in this chapter is that they didn't receive the promise. You see there, all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. It's not a very inspiring way to talk about believing in a promise and not having received it. So these people, it looks like their faith had failed them. From the world's perspective, their faith had failed. But they didn't understand that their faith was to be fulfilled in this age, but in the age to come. Okay? And it would only be together with us that this promise would be fulfilled. So the question is then, what did they believe in? Let's discuss it. If they looked to something in the future, and then you have this extraordinary verse that says, God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. Okay, so let's go back. What is perfection in Hebrews? What constitutes teleosis, perfection? The resurrection. Okay, so Jesus attains perfection through the resurrection. That's how he attains. So he's saying only together with us would they be made perfect. So somebody tell me, what is all this pointing to? Yeah? So when do they receive the promise? And what is that promise? Yeah? Well, we've all got that now, but where does it end up? I've kind of said it. Like, they all believe in the age to come, right? They're all hoping for a better resurrection. When is that promise going to be fulfilled? It only gets fulfilled along with us. So in other words, the fulfillment of the promise takes place on the last day when you have the general resurrection. That's when they attain the promise. That's what they were hoping for, the resurrection and the new city. Yeah, it's still future. I mean, so they won't receive the promise. It's like, they may have gone to the restaurant before us, but they don't start eating until we get there. It's like that. So, people, the resurrection doesn't happen until we all share in it together. It's not a piecemeal thing. So they are not made perfect individually. They are made perfect together with us. And that's when the promise is fulfilled. Make sense?
Do you think there is a connection between this last thing you have said and the reason why these people failed so many times, even the Jewish people failed so many times? Do you think it has a connection with the fact that us, we were also to be saved
Mm.
together with them, and therefore these things have to happen so that we got to know
I think the Hebrews writer is contradicting a common perception that the kingdom of God is enacted on earth in the current circumstances. So you see at the beginning of Acts, the disciples say to Jesus, "Will you at this time restore Israel?" They ask him that question. So the restoration of Israel is the critical thing. And they're looking for the establishment of the kingdom on earth. Jesus wasn't talking about the establishment of a kingdom on earth. He's talking about another reality and a greater reality. He says, if this was if my kingdom was of this earth, then my followers would defend me, but it's not of this earth. You see, that's what he said to Pilate. So we have this image of a future hope. A future hope doesn't give us much comfort when you're going through a lot of trouble, and you're going through difficulties and suffering and loneliness and bills and all sorts of problems. But the point is that it should, because that's what drove these people. That's what enabled them to face these hideous circumstances, to be courageous at times, but also to be subjected to extreme violence, to be prepared to live outside of the city, outside of the system. Look at John the Baptist, somebody who lives completely outside of the system. He was prepared to do that. I don't know to what extent maybe we should be trying to live outside the system. I do know one guy who totally lives outside of the system in Australia. He doesn't have a driver's license, he doesn't have a passport, he's got nothing to identify himself. He makes up his own number plates. He wrote a letter to the Queen saying that he was an independent person and not under the authority of anybody. He's a doctor. He and his wife are both doctors. They're very intelligent people, and they've developed this view that they just don't want to be associated at all with the world. So he doesn't take money. For people he treats, he only takes exchange of goods. It's extraordinary. He's actually living this extraordinary commitment. I think it's weird. I don't think it's. But at the same time, I do think there is a case to say that we should have lives that are exceptionally different. Exceptionally different. And we need to think about how that would look. How do our lives look exceptionally different? But anyway, what did they believe in? What were they looking forward to? And okay, so this is where it goes into chapter 12, 1 to 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. So who is the great cloud of witnesses he's talking about? No? Yeah, Hebrews 11. These are the witnesses. These are the people testifying to us. Right? This is the cloud of witnesses that are testifying to us. He says, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily ensnares us, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. You say, well, what is the race marked out for us? And then he says it. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Okay, and this completes a large section. So if you go back to Hebrews 3, and you find in verse 1 of Hebrews 3, and then so you've got verse 1 and 2 of Hebrews 12. He says, therefore, holy brothers who share in the heavenly calling, fix your thoughts on Jesus, the apostle and high priest whom we confess. Here he says, fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith. You see how this is the critical message of Hebrews. You attain these things, you're doing what the witnesses have told you to do by fixing your eyes. So because he's saying, use these witnesses as your examples. They're telling you what to do. And then what is he saying to do? Fix your eyes on Jesus. In other words, that's what they all did. That's what they all did. They all fixed their eyes on Jesus. Right? And we were able to go through the whole list of them and show how many of them actually it even specifies this. For instance, it says that Moses was prepared to turn his back on the pleasures of Egypt and not enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season because he preferred to suffer for the cause of Christ. Moses was prepared to suffer for the cause of Christ. Not the liberation of his people, but the cause of Christ. So we get that throughout this passage, that there's this constant viewing of Jesus down the history of time, and that's where they're setting their hope. Badwell? Oh, yeah. He does in the early chapters talk about emulating those who first gave us the gospel, to use them as examples. So it's a question of where are you getting your inspiration? Who is your example? He's talking to Jews who are finding their inspiration back in Aaron. They want to go back to the system. They want to go back to the high priest. They want to go back to the temple. They see too much value in it. They see temporary prosperity. They see getting their trade back because they're being ostracized because of their faith, this sort of thing. So that's what's inspiring these people going back to Aaron. He's trying to put another vision of inspiration in front of them. And these are the people who are constantly outcasts. These were the people who were rejected by Jerusalem. You know, one thing you notice in this list is you don't have the Jerusalem in crowd in this list at any point. And you might think, well, David was a king in Jerusalem. But David was a king on that nobody wanted. You know, he was the ruler that nobody wanted. And the way you see this is when his own son rises up against him, Absalom, and David has to flee. Nobody in Israel would protect him. Nobody in Israel would give him shelter. And he has to find shelter with the Philistines. And you know, when we talk about Israel and David's relationship, it's an interesting one. Because why does David have a bodyguard of 600 men and they're all Gentiles? That's his personal bodyguard. Why would a Jewish king find Gentile bodyguards to keep him safe? Doesn't make sense, does it? Unless he knew that he was constantly in danger from the community. And he's the seed bearer. You know, think of Jesus. Was Jesus welcomed by Jerusalem? Jesus steps out of the womb and Jerusalem sends an army to destroy him. You see, this is an ancient narrative and it doesn't change. David is the seed bearer, so they can't be for David. David is always going to be the enemy because he represents Christ. So you've always got this unhappy relationship. I talk about this, you know, when we talk about the Christ and the Antichrist, they're both found in Jerusalem. They're both found in Jerusalem. It's like this is the arena. This is the arena where the battle takes place. And you've got the Antichrist taking on the Christ, and it's all happening in Jerusalem. Just like in the Garden of Eden, where that was the focus of God's activity, you have the serpent and the woman and the man, and that's where the battle takes place. They're both there. Same in Jerusalem. You've got Israel who wants to kill Christ, and you've got Christ who wants to save the world. Both there. This is the battleground. And this goes on throughout Israel's history. The anointed ones, the ones who were chosen by God, were always persecuted to such an extent that Jesus could proclaim with great confidence, was there ever a prophet that died outside of Jerusalem? I mean, doesn't that sum it up? Was there, I mean, how ironic, you know, was there ever a prophet who died outside of Jerusalem? In other words, this is where the prophets come to die. And this is where Jesus is going to die, because the enemy is Jerusalem. And that's where the Saviour will die. And that's where all the righteous died. You see, this is not a glitch when Jesus comes. This is a consistent history. Your second question. Yeah. Yeah. And there was a view in the early church that this was the case, but the point is that within the context of this letter, these people were sick of suffering. He says, none of you have had to shed blood for the faith, but he did say you're having your possessions confiscated. He implies that they are having financial hardship because they're in a Jewish community that has said, don't deal with Jews who aren't part of the system. It's very easy to do. If you're in a dominant culture, it's very easy to isolate people financially. Don't buy their products, don't go to their shops. You know, cancel culture, isn't that what it is? I mean, isn't that cancel culture? You know, when you persecute people by boycotting, and that was the kind of suffering they were going through. So, and this suffering was making them uncomfortable. And he's saying, look, this is our history, this is our lot. For us, I think the pertinent message is, we are comfortable now. I don't walk through Porto Palazzo and people throw tomatoes at me because I'm a Christian. It won't happen. I can even tell people I'm a Christian. They won't try to kill me or put a knife in my ribs or anything. But that could be the future. And we've always got to be ready to, say, okay, if it comes to that, I can't just capitulate. I can't just be a part of. I've got to make a choice. Thankfully, we don't have to make that choice now. But who's to say if it's in our future? In parts of the world, yes. In Nigeria, I mean, there wasn't there a Christian church, 40 people killed last weekend? Barely makes the news, Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it's still within the realm of toleration, But like in Nigeria at the moment, there's serious Christian persecution. In India, there's serious Christian persecution. Even in the United States, it's being underreported, but there's been something like 30 centres for the support of pregnant women that have been firebombed, in the last month. And it's not being reported. You have to get it through alternative media because it doesn't fit the narrative. Because the High Court there is talking about overturning Roe versus Wade, which gives legitimacy to national abortion law. And so centres now that are pro-family Christian, they're getting attacked by that. So it could turn very quickly. That's the point. It could turn very quickly. You might think you're in a society that's safe. Look how quickly things have turned in Western countries in the last couple of years. Things that you would never imagine taking place. And it's just happening everywhere. We're all noticing this decay. It could come quickly. So we have to be ready. We have to be ready for the possibility that we may have to suffer, be imprisoned, be persecuted, even die for the faith. And we're not alone if this happens. We've been the exception, in a sense, in Europe and Western countries. But the time may be upon us where this will be the case. So this could be very pertinent for us, that we have to use these guys as the examples. They were prepared to be outcasts. They were prepared to be sawn in two. They were prepared to live without their Gucci bag and just put on a camel skin, They were prepared to live outside of the system if it meant that. So that's all I've got really for tonight. That's all I wanted to cover, and we're in great time. Not sure what this is. All of this points to the new heaven and new earth, the resurrection from the dead. I mean, that's the whole focus. That's what he's encouraging us to put our hope into. Okay? So, let's have a time of prayer. And I think Catherine's going to find a corner to sleep in. You like that? That's me out on the lake. No. It's not, just in case. Okay, so just go into your normal prayer groups and for 10 minutes and